take every treasure, take this life. Everything's on the altar now. No holding back, no holding out.
This is Pastor Blake. Thanks. We're looking here at Core Practice 6 at day 4, and now we're going to move out of Matthew's Gospel. We're going to move some years after Jesus, where the early church is trying to put into practice Jesus's teachings. And so we're going to look at a teaching from the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And I'm going to take you through a number of verses and just point out to you some truths about biblical giving that Jesus has encouraged and Jesus has called us to do. So in 2 Corinthians 8, Paul is writing to the church, people like you and me that are trying to follow the ways of Jesus, the church in a city called Corinth. He's writing to them. He's also going to be referencing another group of churches in a neighboring area of Macedonia. And he's going to be kind of using the Macedonians as an example for the Corinthians. But in both cases, he is taking up an offering for the poor, particularly the poor back in Jerusalem. And so that's our context. So in 2 Corinthians 8, Paul says, "And now, brothers and sisters," he's writing to his brothers and sisters in the faith, "we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches." So he's going to use them as an example to encourage the church in Corinth. First thing I want you to know is that this kind of giving that is pleasing to the Lord is empowered by God's grace. 3 times in this passage, this slide and the next slide, you'll see it, is the word grace. Grace implies that God gives us something, empowers us to do something we can't do in our own strength. The word grace and the word gift are actually closely related. This is a gift from God. We haven't earned it, but God has offered his assistance, his help, his provision. And so he says here, he's going to start commending the Macedonians and their giving, but the first thing he says is the grace that God has given them. God is the one who empowered them. I want you to hold on to that truth because we're going to come back to that as our takeaway from today. But verse 2, "In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity." So this kind of biblical giving is generous. Verse 3, "For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability." So the third thing we would say is it's sacrificial. So if you want to begin to just think about your giving habits, is it something that requires God's enabling? Is it something that would be described as generous, something that is sacrificial? Then it goes on to the second part of verse 3. "It was entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people." And so this kind of giving is seen as a privilege, not a duty, not something you do begrudgingly, but seen as a privilege to participate with something that matters to God. To say, can I please get involved with that? I want some skin in the game to do something of this magnitude. Let me keep reading here in 2 Corinthians 8, now at verse 5. "And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us." So another attribute of this kind of giving is it is Lord-focused. I want you to think about that for a moment. Sometimes our giving, we think of it in terms of kind of what makes us feel good, or maybe someone who pulls on our heartstrings, and we're kind of wanting to please them, keep them happy. They are giving first of all to the Lord. That is what's driving their giving. Verse 6, "So we urge Titus," that's one that Paul sent ahead to kind of get the offering ready. "We urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part." So not only was he talking about the grace that God gave the Macedonians, he's saying now God's going to pour out his grace. He's going to help you to be a part of this offering as well. Verse 7, "But since you excel in everything, Now I want you to notice, he's talking about them, he's commending them. They excel in their faith, in their speech, maybe the way they speak about Jesus, or maybe the way they've kind of corrected their vulgar language, but they excel in their faith, in their speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love that we have kindled in you. You've excelled in that. See that you also excel in this grace of giving. And so here's another thing I want you to see. That giving is worth excelling in. It's not just something that we kind of start doing. Maybe we get to a point where we say, okay, I'm tithing now, it's all good, I put that on the back burner. No, it's an area that we can continue to grow in terms of how strategic we are, or maybe how sacrificial we are, or how generous we are, or understanding God's heart more so that our giving is more Lord focused than it was before. But it's an area we can continue to grow in. And then one more time we see that it is referred to as a grace. So let me just close with this takeaway, and I want you to think about this, because maybe the first time through it won't make complete sense to you. But when it comes to giving, I want to encourage you that you don't allow what you don't have, right? The Macedonians were poor. They didn't have much. They could say, well, Paul, go to some other church. Some other church can be a part of this. We can't make much of a difference. But like the Macedonians, don't allow what you don't have to keep you from participating in this, to keep you from experiencing the blessing. Because you see, it's God's grace. God will equip you. God will provide for you. And God will use what you give to have an even greater impact. And so remember the way this section started in 2 Corinthians 8. Paul says, we want you to know about the grace, that is the help, the empowerment that God has given these poor Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, in the midst of their joy in loving the Lord, in the midst of their extreme poverty, it all welled up into rich generosity. And so don't allow your lack to think that you cannot participate this way. You may say, well, I'll leave that for some successful businessman or someone who's now retired and has some means. I'll serve in some other way. Well, that would be wonderful, serve in some other ways. But don't miss out on this, because God can take whatever you step out sacrificially to give, whatever by your standards, your experience is generous. God will give you the grace to participate, and He'll grace that to use it in an exponential way. I hope you'll experience the joy and the significance of being a sacrificial giver.
Take every treasure, take this life. Oh, that I am for all that you are.